Dorothy Porter created for herself a unique place in our poetry, and her books went out and found a loyal and affectionate audience. That was on the page. Off it, in performance, as you'll see in this tribute, Dorothy's energy and wit and style were unforgettable.
I wanted to be a writer from the age of 14. But it wasn't till I was older, more like 16, that I could see that really where I was going was towards poetry rather than prose.
It's almost embarrassing sometimes to tell people you're a poet. It's seeing a shadow across people's face. They think, you must be such a wanker. I think in the popular mind, poetry is either excruciatingly emotional, like the sort of stuff that you write in secret as an adolescent and put in a drawer, or it is pretentious.
I think Dorothy's been pretty good at seizing a voice that will remain familiar to us for quite a while. She likes risky characters. She likes risky decisions made by them. That's actually pretty compelling reading.
Is this how poems start? When every riff on the radio hooks in your throat. Is this how poems start? When the vein under her skin hooks in your throat. Is this how poems start? When insomnia pounds like spooked black horses, when the day breaks like car crash glass. Tell me, Mickey, you knew, tell me. Does a poem start with a hook in the throat?
I think what I wanted to do, though it wasn't conscious at the time, is I wanted to write something more daemonic, feral, and I wanted to write something darker and more exciting than what prose I was reading could deliver. I mean, I wanted to write poetry like Jimi Hendrix played the guitar, or how Janis Joplin sang, or how Mick Jagger moved across the stage. I wanted to do that.
I can hear them behind me, rustling, their leathery wings. Frank shuts his eyes. I can smell them. Frank's fag-holding hand trembles. They smell like women going out in puffs of powder and too much scent.
Poetry is often full of ghosts, and my poetry is a very haunted place. It's a haunted place for me, and it's a haunted place for a reader. In the poem Thin Ice, skating on ice can be an image of pleasure and freedom. But I think that for me the night world is the dream world, particularly a city at night is a realm of risk and danger. I aim to create a visceral, 5-dimensional, even 6-dimensional world in poetry. If you can't do that, you shouldn't write poetry. Poetry should create all these extra dimensions. The words should push against the boundaries of the senses.
In recent years, people like to hear poetry read. And, you know, even at a festival like the Adelaide Writers' Week, which is the last time I heard Dorothy, people are surprised that if you put on a poetry program, so many people turn up to it. I think Dorothy's poetry was always, in her own writing of it, meant to be read and performed. She hoped that that's what people would be doing with it while they were reading it. And of course, when she did it herself, it was wonderful to see, because that's when you saw how the rhythms of that poetry and its quickness of movement was related to body, because her body read it as well as just voice.
Bill works on keeping his face still, but not cold. As Emma's father, Tim Farmer, academic from some cool department at Melbourne Uni, poignantly dumpy in his existential jeans and leather jacket, growls through his grief. Bill knows from experience that Tim Farmer will only stop when he can bear the silence. There is something Bill from the Homicide Department of Hard Bloody Unfair Knocks would like to share with Tim Farmer. He would like to tell him at a grieved length how all of us, no matter how brave or timid, are walking on thin ice. That for no good nor fair reason could crack under us at any time. In the ice's time, when the cold black water will receive and swallow us, leaving nothing but a passing warm steam to show briefly where we had been. But oh, how Bill hated. He'd rage and bawl with Tim Farmer if he could, when the ice took a child. As if the ice didn't get enough. As if the ice was just cruel and greedy. We all have so much to bear. The slip, the slide, the sense of the dark, frigid nothing under our warm-blooded mortal feet. But when the ice takes our young, we know we'll never have happiness or find our deluded footing again.
You must write with either music in mind or even with the headphones in as you write, do you?
Yeah, I mean, my best friend is now my iPod, but when I was a kid, it was my transistor. But that's how I started writing, was to music through earphones, just somehow or another changing my brain chemistry, and I still do.
It gets you to a place, a mood?
It acts like some kind of hallucinogenic drug, I think, music on me, because sometimes the song or piece of music that I'm writing to can be quite banal. It doesn't have to be anything extraordinary or profound. I'm not always writing from the chorus from Tannhauser or whatever. It can often be just something amazingly, some pop song from somewhere. As long as it has some kind of, and I have no idea how this works, as long as there is some kind of dark needle that somehow or another stirs my consciousness, I now trust that process.
Dorothy Porter has written 6 volumes of verse, 5 verse novels, 2 books for teenagers, and 2 librettos. But it was Dorothy's verse novels that helped broaden the public's view of what she and poetry could offer. 2 of her first novels were shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Award. But it all really began with The Monkey's Mask.
I wanted it marketed as a novel. I didn't want it down the back of the shop. With the wrong publisher, The Monkey's Mask could have sunk without a trace, as has happened to so many other books of Australian poetry.
I wondered at the time I wrote it whether in fact it'd find a publisher at all. No, I was astonished. I still don't quite understand the success of that book. I thought The Monkey's Mask is going to, a lot of people are going to find it absolutely horrible and confronting. I mean, it's the sort of book that would have put me in prison 40 years ago.
Why do you say that?
I think because of it's explicitly sexual, it has a lesbian main character, its language is, for some people, still very confrontational. It's not tame.
I came for the quiet. I don't mind the cold, but thick mists, thick neighbours and involuntary celibacy are as inducive to hard drinking as diesel fumes, high rent and corrupt cops. I can't remember what adrenaline tastes like.
There's a strong vein of satire in The Monkey's Mask, and I found that quite fun. Writing Take No Prisoners kind of satirical poetry is a very old tradition in poetry.
Lou, go write a dirty poem.
Listen, I can get you some leads in the poetry scene.
Yeah?
Even failed New Age dyke poets like me rub shoulders with tortured Catholics and faded intellectuals.
One of the things Dorothy did that was remarkable was to find a place for herself in the world of poetry writing, but also poetry publishing, that was absolutely her own. She created those pieces of fiction with their very spare language, and punchy rhythms, those offbeat characters and the taut plot lines. And people were enormously attracted to that. I mean, they recognised immediately somebody who was doing something they couldn't find anywhere else.
Woven throughout El Dorado are very vivid memories of childhood games and friendships. What was the appeal for you in mining that particular terrain?
I mean, the glib answer would be that I'd mined certain things from my own childhood. But I think childhood, though, is this Eden for all of us in some ways. The childhood you may have had or the childhood you didn't have. And I think that all adults have that pull on them, whether their childhood was happy or miserable. And certainly on the whole, mine was a very happy childhood, and one of the major threads of El Dorado is friendship, particularly lifelong friendship, friendships that start when you're a kid and go right through, that travel with you.
There is enormously dark terrain in El Dorado.
Yes, there is.
Deciding to write a verse novel about a child killer who is described and understood by those who are trying to track him down as someone who kills children lovingly immediately takes you into quite dangerous terrain, actually.
I think it might have been a very difficult book for a man to write and get away with, which I think is totally unfair, by the way. But I also wanted to understand. I think there's a huge amount of moral hysteria about anything to do with children in our culture at the moment. I think, like most writers, I don't want to judge, I want to understand.
There could be a bit of a backlash about a subject so dark.
Look, I remember there was a backlash from, interestingly enough, from feminist quarters over The Monkey's Mask, accusing me of letting the side down in every respect. You know, women, lesbians, middle class, working class, and that I'd written a book of, moral depravity, I think, was one of the descriptions of it. Well, maybe I've done it again. America, the adjective. Phoebe at the podium is so American. Articulate. Impossible to believe she has a molecule of stuttering humanity. Territorial. Her mind not only knows but owns the cosmos. Vulgar. Spruiking her quasars, her black holes and galaxies like Big Mac specials. Puritanical. Fiddling with the fussy little buttons over her breasts. Narcissistic, thighs, belly, breast and bum, Jim perfect. Insular, no mysteries left. Phoebe, why bother looking out the window? Why bother looking at me? Everywhere, everyone is just waiting to become America. Even your mighty quasars on the fiery edge of time will learn to wear their galaxy-gorging jets base, bloody, ball backwards. But one thing that has struck me about Americans, particularly incredibly successful Americans, and I stress that that's what Phoebe is, she's a very, very successful astronomer, is their level of self-confidence, their way of being in the world, that I think even Australians at their most successful don't really have. I think maybe it's because we come from a society which is where self-deprecation is de rigueur, and where there's a whole sort of larrikin culture and there is this sort of contempt for authority and so forth. We don't have that level of breezy self-confidence that, exemplified in the American president. When you wonder what he's got to be so self-confident about. But a character like Phoebe, who's got a great deal to be self-confident about, I think can be almost impervious to other people, impervious to self-doubt. Particularly from an Australian's point of view. The Beast. It could just as easily have been called the Seaman Way. Phoebe tells me in her sharp, dirty way. We're lying under a rug, somewhere outside Ballarat, by a murmuring, invisible river. The Milky Way streaming and sparkling over our heads is making me happily bereft of smart, competitive metaphors. Milky. It's not a dear old moo cow up there. There's a beast, a real beast at the centre of our galaxy, but it's no domesticated pet. It roars in gamma rays from its black hole lair of 1,000,000 crushed suns. And one day, babe, all those pretty stars, blue, red and brindle, and all who sail on them will pour down its black gullet and disappear forever. Snuggling into Phoebe's warm side, I grin at her horror story. Nearby, in the swampy smell, frogs are making a wonderful racket.
I think Dorothy's response to music was over a very wide field. That means the most contemporary kinds of rock, but also jazz, also classical music of a kind, but mostly music that was in some way related to voice. And so it didn't surprise me that she found in herself a capacity for writing a libretto for an opera. And of course she wrote 2 very, very good works.
Dorothy Porter has dragged poetry back into the mainstream, and now she's taking on a new medium, opera.
I can't quite believe I'm the first person to have asked her to do a libretto. The lines being, I am this black place come bearing you my dowry. I am this black place come to marry you forever.
Jonathan Mills says Dorothy Porter's writing style is a composer's dream.
So there's always a chord that's sort of consonant like this. She has the ability to be intense and succinct, that in 3 or 4 well-chosen sentences she can encapsulate a whole mood and a very tangible set of images. And when you're singing and when you've got an orchestra there and you've got instruments and all of those sorts of things, you need something in the poetry that gives you the space to allow that sort of music to exist, and yet the intensity of vocalisation, the intensity of verbal information that can convey an appropriate image.
You know, I hear a lot of writers say, oh, what a nightmare it is to work, to write screenplays for films or to work collaboratively because you lose control and you've got to take other people into account and so forth. Look, I think the frustrated old actress in me and is really, I've really enjoyed working with actors. I've really enjoyed working with singers. I've enjoyed working with Jonathan and Paul, who are both fabulous musicians. It's been an education.
Do you stay closely involved with the process? Do you
Yes,
stay during rehearsals? You work with the actors?
Absolutely. I really like that part of it. I mean, look, sometimes I'm just watching, particularly watching Richard Gill. I learn watching Richard. I mean, Richard's also, amongst many things, is a great educator.
Yes.
Particularly as far as music is concerned.
As well as a great showman in his own right.
and incredibly funny. I mean, I just sort of could watch Richard all day.
And The Eternity Man's being turned into a film now.
It is.
Has it been very much changed from your original vision to where it's getting now?
I think it's got a hell of a lot better. The input made by the creative team making the film, who saw the production in first London and then came and saw the concert version that we had at the Sydney Opera House with Richard, were obviously impressed enough to want to make a film of it, but had a number of suggestions as to developing the libretto so it could become more of a film libretto and a film script.
If they want the cross, let them learn to follow it. I have taken up my cross, followed its pains, its glorious banners. What a lonely battle my life has become.
I've said this before, but the most extraordinary and exciting thing that happens to most of us is falling in love. And that's why so much poetry, so many song lyrics, etc., are about that experience. And that's where words become music. Language is always inadequate. you know, writers always talk with frustration about how music does things better. Music cuts to the chase in a way that words are always inadequate. They're always shop-soiled even before you use them. But just sometimes poetry can leap that gap, can be music, even if for a nanosecond.